did we evolve from what we conceived? Either way, we got what we needed when the sun shone down on the Garden of Eden.
Don't you know we're gonna have a Solartopia, Solartopia, Solartopia. Don't you know we're gonna have a Solartopia all over God's green world?
Well, we bit that apple and the garden was lost, and so we had to work to pay the cost. And so we went digging into the ground and started to burn many things we found. But
oh yeah, we did. We started to burn too many things we found, and our world is burning all around us. This is Harvey Sluggo Wasserman with another hour here in the Solartopia Green Power and Wellness Show. We have an amazingly important and one of those unintended consequences things to talk about. We have three of the world's great experts on atomic energy, and we want to talk about the impact of COVID, of the Trump virus on the nuclear power industry. We've already seen some major developments here, and nobody is better suited to talk to us about it than MAGGIE Gundersen with ARNIE in Charleston, South Carolina at Fairewinds. Are you guys with us?
We sure are.
Okay, and Paul Gunter, you're in the deepest, darkest swamp there in the D.C. area. You with us?
Yeah, it's from the District of Corruption.
Yes, well, you know, this situation is perfectly suited to establish a dictator. The Trump people are doing everything in their power to exploit this, right from cutting auto emission standards. I mean, you know, it's unspeakable that an administration which is allegedly caring for the health and safety of the public, for which we pay a dear price in terms of our taxes, that they take this opportunity to slash protections for air and water, and then to come at the auto industry, which really doesn't even want it. Most of them don't, in cutting the efficiency standards. I mean, it's just unspeakable. And also unspeakable is the fact that the nuclear power industry, which is completely uneconomic, losing money everywhere, is using this opportunity to go in and grab money out of the stimulus package. And I want to put this out there, Maggie and Arnie and Paul, before we jump into our discussion. I am in Los Angeles, and we are in a situation now. I'm directly downwind from the Diablo Canyon atomic reactors, where I was arrested in 1984, shortly after getting arrested with you, Paul, at Seabrook. And we had just had Pacific Gas and Electric, the owner of the two reactors at Diablo Canyon, plead guilty to, it got some kind of sound in the background there. I'm not sure what it is. Plead guilty. Pacific Gas and Electric, which was once the largest utility in the world, has pled guilty to 85, count them, 85 counts of involuntary manslaughter for having burned down Northern California and killed 84 people, and burned down the town of Paradise, which Trump called pleasure. And this is the second set of felonies that Pacific Gas and Electric has pleaded guilty to. They also burned down 19 houses in San Bruno and killed 8 people with a badly maintained gas line. And so this is their second set of felonies. It's their second set of bankruptcy. And these are the people running the commercial nuclear power plant. So let's start with you, Arnie. We are now worried at Diablo Canyon about the possibility that the COVID could come in and decimate the workforce. Is this and make the reactor two reactors there even more unmanageable than they already are? Is that crying wolf, or is that a real concern?
No, I don't think you're crying wolf, Harvey. They're going to bring 1,000 people in or 1,600 in from all over the country and dump them into San Luis Obispo, where they'll if nothing else, get the members of the town ill because these guys and women have to eat somewhere, and they'll be forget social distancing. But what's worse is that they are trying to eliminate commitments that they had already chosen to meet to accomplish certain tasks. Now, those tasks were safety significant. Those tasks were for improved reliability, and so they're trying to kick the can down the road and say, hey, 18 months from now we'll worry about that. And the question is why? Are they hiding behind the coronavirus? I think they are. What's really going on is that they want a short outage because the managers are all tied to bonuses, tied to a short outage. I really think it's all about maintaining the managers' bonus plans so they walk away with large lumps of cash if they can get this outage done quickly. Last point is there's nothing in regulation that says a reactor has to be closed for only 30 days or 25 days or whatever. If they can't get the job done, take longer.
Well, we don't want the job done at all. But you're right, Arnie Gundersen. I mean, let's explain the situation. I'm sure that not all of our listeners fully understand. Can you explain what is scheduled to happen here that will be impacted by the coronavirus, Arnie? You're the engineer.
Well, after 18 months of nuclear reactors, nuclear fuel has to be replaced. So they will disassemble the top of the nuclear reactor and pull the fuel out and put fresh fuel in so that it can run for another 18 months. That's one activity that's done every 18 months. But then in addition, and you and I have discussed this frequently, there's all sorts of inspections that should be done. They'll ultrasonically test cracks, joints in pipe to make sure there are no cracks. They'll ultrasonically look for cracks in the nuclear reactor. And what they're asking for are all of those different tests. They're saying, well, we're safe enough. Give us another 18 months before we look for cracks or we make significant repairs. In many cases, they've committed to these repairs, a year or 2 or 3 years earlier. So if they were important a year ago, why aren't they important now? They should shut down until they meet all their commitments.
So you're saying that PG&E is asking, Diablo Unit 1 is scheduled to be refueled in September, October. And normally, in that situation, they bring in 1,000 or 1,500 workers from, I guess there's an itinerant crew that goes around. I suppose they're all living in Airstreams or RVs or something. And they go in and they switch out the fuel, and then simultaneously they do the inspections on the reactor because the reactor is shut. And what you're saying now is that PG&E is asking that they refuel, but they not do the inspection? Is that right?
Yes, they not do all the inspections and they not do all of the maintenance repairs that they had previously committed to. Yeah, because they're anticipating there'll be fewer people because people are going to get sick and not come, and they still want to meet the 30-day outage window that they had previously established. Well, with fewer people, they're not going to make that window. So they have two choices: either take their time and do it right, or ask the NRC for a waiver and kick these projects off for another 18 months.
Maggie, do you want to comment on that, on the health aspects of it?
Our daughter is an emergency room trauma nurse, and as time is going on down here in South Carolina where we now live, there are more and more cases coming in. They're worse cases. So when we're looking at how a nuclear plant is going to bring all these extra people on, that's going to overwhelm the local hospital and medical system that's there that's already getting overwhelmed. It's just an impossible situation. Additionally, the New York Times released a CDC report yesterday that said that fully 25% of the people of the United States may be COVID-19 positive and show no symptoms. They're finding that fully 25%. So that means all of these tests that have been happening because there are not enough test kits anywhere, and the duration takes so long. In South Carolina, you send it out to another state, and it has to wait 4 or 5 days before you get a result. And before there was any self-quarantining or anything, people are just walking around on, I forget what the amount was. I think one person can infect 70 people with just normal behavior, going to the gas station, going to the grocery store, not wearing masks, touching things, whatever. And that 25% of the people will never show any symptoms. I've had people say to me, well, I don't have any symptoms. I'm not sick. When we go out, and there are times we have to go out because we have to get food and take care of a little bit of things. So we go out, we have masks on and gloves on because of our age and because of health issues that we face. We have to protect ourselves as well. And then our daughter is trying to make sure they have enough masks in the emergency room. They've already been told that they have to be careful with masks and gowns and gloves.
Are we thinking that the people? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Harvey, it talks to a bigger issue. For example, 75% of all of the gloves that our medical people use are made in the Philippines. So as long as we outsource everything from this country and corporations do business that way, we're never going to be protected. Americans need jobs.
So how does this impact, Maggie, the potential health risk? How would you evaluate the health risk for the people of San Luis Obispo and these other counties where these nuclear plants are, of these itinerant crews of technicians coming in to do the refueling and the repairs?
I think it's huge. And I think it'll do a cascade in that area of just, people come in, they think they're not sick. Maybe they have symptoms. They think it's allergies or, I have a slight cold. A lot of the people, the tech workers, are educated in what they know how to do, whether that's welding pipes or inspecting or whatever part, but they're not medical people. They don't know how to assess their own physiology, and it's very difficult to get testing. I know people who have significant symptoms, and they're adults here. They can't get any testing. They have to prove that they were associated with someone who has been proven to have a case of COVID.
And then these guys are probably traveling with their families. So if I'm the town supervisor or the county supervisor in San Luis Obispo, what do I say about the 1,000 people coming in the fall to deal with the nuke?
I think it's going to be a super strain on all the emergency services here and elsewhere. I mean, I think I've read in the last 2 days, because I'm looking at it with our daughter and a lot of our friends are doctors, nurses, and EMS workers, and I was an EMS worker at one time. So these companies are cutting benefits. These people are losing insurance. They're losing sick days. They're losing any extra pay. I mean, I'm sure you all have heard about Amazon, where a number of the Whole Foods facilities struck this week because they wanted extra pay, double time for hazard pay, and to make sure they had enough masks and gowns. And since they're, at this point, a necessary service for all of us, they should be protected. But I can tell you from the hospitals where I know people all over the country, and I know nurses and I know doctors, they're not getting that protection. So how is that going to be dealt with in California?
I started to walk into the Whole Foods around the corner here, and I looked in, and none of the employees in Whole Foods were wearing either masks or gloves. So
Well, you'd think when it's owned by Amazon and it's the richest company in the world and the richest man in the world, he could afford to donate all that to his personnel to protect his people and to protect all Americans. That would be the patriotic thing to do.
I'm going to say it here first on the air. Jeff Bezos is a total pig. I mean, I had a very close friend who worked at Amazon before all this happened. And the stories he was telling me, I mean, he had a friend of his just die on the floor at Amazon, and in his 50s, this guy, and they had no way to treat him, it's unbelievable. Paul Gunter, how do you see this COVID epidemic affecting the nuclear power industry?
Well, it sort of looks like a 50-foot tall tsunami in many ways, in that we have this natural event that's sweeping around the world, and it's leaving in its wake incredible consequences in terms of, it's first of all, it's highly contagious, and it can be extremely debilitating, including fatal. And so these workforces, as you've outlined with MAGGIE and ARNIE, they are essentially large populations, and there's a number of these groups of workers who are committed to refueling and maintenance and other kinds of repairs to nuclear power stations. And there's no doubt that that they're carrying the virus with them, and they're sweeping into these communities. Actually, just in the news today, the Limerick nuclear power station is preparing to go into one of these refueling outages, and it can be 18 to 24 months. Depending on the reactor, what fuel cycle they've chosen, and the local community, the county governments are concerned that they're Trojan horses for this virus into their communities. So they've objected to the refueling of the Limerick nuclear power station. That's 2 Fukushima-style reactors in Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia. So, it's a major metropolitan area, and the NRC's just totally
now,
impervious.
Paul, give me some detail here. When was this is the 2 reactors at Limerick? What government body has raised the issue?
I was looking that up, Harvey. It's just in the news today. I don't have it right in front of me, but it was county, as principally public health officials within the state of Pennsylvania have raised concerns. And as best as we can tell right now, and again, that's the lagging of public reporting of this, they're being ignored, as they have been all across the country. There's probably 9 units of the 96 right now that are in refueling, and more coming. But what's that's enough concern right there. That they're bringing this right now uncontrolled virus when everybody should be hunkering down.
Harvey,
they're also talking
Paul.
about limiting, as ARNIE raised, some significant work activities that in fact are scheduled according to the refueling outage under technical specifications. So their licensing agreement says that every 24 months you shall in your outage do steam generator tube inspections. And these are major high pressure boundaries in thousands of steel tubes that are coming off of the reactor directly with superheated steam. And it's so hot that it and under such pressure in these reactors that they don't even turn to steam. It's like molten water under pressure in a molten form that is not allowed to turn to steam. So in these steam generators, these tubes come together under extreme pressure, 2,000 pounds per square inch, 600 degrees Fahrenheit, and then they, through a tube exchange, they turn another set of tubes filled with water into steam. That's what goes over to the turbine as steam and generates electricity. But the stress, the heat, the radiation, these all combine in these degradation mechanisms that can cause cracks. And if you break one of these 6,000 tubes per generator, sometimes 4 generators in a nuke, you can cause a guillotine from the steam break that would break many more and successionally more steam generator tubes, resulting in an emergency, in a loss of coolant accident in the nuclear power station. And
well, let me Paul, I've looked it up here, and Maggie, I'll get to you next. I'm looking on my computer here. There was an ABC News report in Limerick Township, Pennsylvania. And here, let me just read the story. There's a major dispute brewing between Montgomery County and the Exelon Corporation, and it all has to do with the coronavirus and the Limerick nuclear power plant. And it says here that the parking lot was designated for the new contractors who are going to come in and who are scheduled to do the refueling and the repairs that Arnie explained. And the Montgomery County Board of Commissioners said that they gave them, quote, a lackluster social distancing plan. And so she said that this is the chair of the Montgomery County Board of Commissioners said, quote, we learned of plans to bring approximately 1,800 workers into our region from around the United States. We asked Exelon to postpone this refuel until a time when the disease burden from COVID was lower. Now, obviously, but Exelon has moved forward. I mean, these guys.
See, and here we go. The production agenda is more important than public health and safety. Not only is the public health issue, Sluggo, due to the coronavirus, but there are going to be safety consequences. Let me just finish real quick here. In the autumn of 1999, the Indian Point Nuclear Power Station Unit 2 was scheduled for a refueling outage and a steam generator inspection and repair on these high-pressure, high-temperature tubes. And they put in a license amendment that said, well, you know what, we want to go through this outage quicker, and we want to postpone by a year. And they went through a license amendment process, and in fact, the commission allowed them to expedite through the license amendment process, and they didn't even, the staff that was supposed to give it the safety review, they were limited in the amount of questions that they could ask on this. And so they went. So Indian Point, under Consolidated Edison, went back online in late December, January 2000 timeframe, and within a month of coming back online, they blew a steam generator tube. Luckily, it didn't cause this guillotine effect that I'm telling you about, that the steam can come out with a razor-sharp cut that starts a cascade of tube failures and a loss of coolant accident. We escaped that. That was a near miss. But it was all on this premise that you can accommodate a production agenda at the sacrifice of public health and safety, and the NRC will go along with it. And so we're now approaching that same kind of strategy, and in fact, it's to save the industry money, as Arnie's pointed out, on a industry-wide scale under this smokescreen of a real threat from the COVID, but they're going to turn it into the economic advantage of the industry.
Wow. Maggie?
There have been a couple other new reports up about different cities. For example, New Orleans had a 42% increase as of today in COVID cases that were tested, and then you don't consider all the ones that weren't tested or the people that don't have any symptoms. There was a report a few days ago from a virologist, and I don't have that in front of me. I was looking for it while Paul was talking. And it was detailed, and it was a group of virologists. And there are several strains of COVID. They have different DNA and RNA. So the RNA is the key factor. And the version in Asia is the more predominant one in the U.S. Europe has a different background, different makeup to its virus in most of Europe. So you're looking at, and there were four variations. A different one was showing up in parts of Africa as well. So no one knows yet, is this mutating, or were there different things that just happened the way people contacted each other? So if you have all these nuclear workers traveling from all different parts of the U.S., it may be that part of the U.S. has one variation and part of the U.S. has another. The two coasts are very different, and where their travelers came from. It may be more the European RNA version that could be on the East Coast because so many travelers came back from Italy and Europe, and it may be more the Asian version on the West Coast because so many tourists and business people fly in there first. So that says,
wow.
All right, what happens if an area's already been hit and the workers come in with a different variation? What does that do? No one knows that yet. That was what the article said, that was left out there. What would that mean? And also this philosophy that the administration has expressed, that there would be a herd immunity, and that's what Boris Johnson is following in the UK. There's no medical data that supports that. A lot of there are 149 different coronaviruses, and this is now a new coronavirus. They don't know if there will be any immunity to this without a vaccine. It may be that it can come back around again. No one knows that yet.
Well, now here in Limerick, in Pennsylvania, a state senator who represents the area has attacked Exelon, saying it's provided an inadequate pandemic response plan, withheld information from county and state officials, failed to prioritize the safety of its employees, contract workers, community first responders, as well as all residents of the 44th Senatorial District and the entire region. This is Senator Katie Muth, I guess, or Mutt, of the 44th Senatorial State Senate District in Pennsylvania. And, obviously, Exelon has just told her essentially to drop dead. The coronavirus death toll in Montgomery County, where the nuke is already up to 10. And the county officials asked Exelon to postpone the refuel until a time when the disease burden from COVID-19 was lower. And Exelon proceeded with the refueling, said they can commit to mitigation measures, social distancing, blah, blah, blah. Arnie, what's going on here? I mean, this is, you don't want to get up and throw things.
Well, Arnie, here's one of my questions for you is, what does that mean in terms of the load? I mean, my understanding is the load has decreased significantly. Do these nukes even have to run?
Yeah, that's important. There's a couple things here. As Paul talked about, these inspections can't be delayed. And the reactor is slowing down now and will simply just run out of uranium at the time it's ready to be refueled. So it's not like you can stretch it out by another 6 months. It's gonna shut down of natural causes in right around the time it's scheduled to be refueled. So the question is, how do you do it? Do you take your time and with a smaller group of professionals make the necessary repairs and inspections? And I absolutely agree. Bypassing these steam generator tube inspections that Paul was talking about is dumb and dangerous. And remember though, there's hundreds of other things they're looking at in that plant as well. And the industry is thinking, just seeking a blanket waiver. And as Maggie talked about, what's the rush? The load in America is lower now because, oh, by the way, we've got this COVID virus and people aren't using as much electricity. So there's no urgency to get this reactor back online. It's as if the owners of these plants are portraying it as some sort of patriotic zeal that they've got to get these reactors up and running. So there's ample power if the reactors stay shut. And Harvey, you'd say, I keep them shut forever. There's ample power for that. Keep them shut until they've done the inspections. There's ample power for that. What is happening, though, are that the managers of these plants are on huge bonuses. The plant manager at Limerick is making more than $350,000 a year, and he's on a 40% bonus plan. He or she, I'm sorry, I don't know which, but is on a 40% bonus plan tied to keeping the plant running when it's running and a very short outage. So if they can fire up Limerick within the 20 or 30 days that they had planned to, this person walks away with another $100,000. So there's a huge financial incentive for the senior managers at these plants to bypass the inspections and get that plant running again. And in fact, it has made plants in the past more dangerous because senior managers have looked the other way and pushed for shorter outages and less inspections.
Jesus. So the situation, I'll get you a sec, Paul. The situation at Diablo, you're mentioning, Maggie, you mentioned need for power, and Arnie. The situation at Diablo Canyon here in California, these two reactors poised to destroy all of California, is that the power is not only not needed, it causes serious problems because of the rise of, the drop in demand, which in California, of course, has been impacted by a lot of efficiency measures. When the nuclear plant is online, it floods the grid with excess power that's not needed, and it knocks wind and solar off the grid, which is cheaper, and so the nuke is costing money there, and it's forcing the shutdown of renewables. And now PG&E has gone to the California Public Utilities Commission and asked for extra money because they're losing $1.2 billion a year at Diablo Canyon producing electricity that's over market price. So our attorney, John Giesman, figured out that they're losing $3.44 million every day they operate Diablo Canyon. And so not only is the power not needed, it's a negative. PG&E because of the spread of CCAs, community choice aggregation, has lost 57% of its customers in the last couple of years, and yet they got these exit fees, and they're charging people who left PG&E, who aren't even getting electricity from PG&E, excess rates to support Diablo Canyon, where the power is not needed. It's just beyond.
Harvey.
This company is in its second bankruptcy and has just submitted to 85 involuntary manslaughter charges. Yes, Maggie, and then Paul.
Okay, it really upsets me when we look at Diablo Canyon because Fairewinds Associates, ARNIE, testified, to the CPUC several years ago about the terrible condition and how decrepit the reactor itself is. The equipment still is analog. There's nothing digital. It doesn't sync right with the grid system. There's all these issues, and PG&E worked hard to block residential solar for years. They don't. The energy isn't needed. The plant is dangerous. It's on a number of faults, earthquake faults, and it's one of the riskier plants in the country. It should be shut down. And to bail it out is just absurd. Use that money to fund the hospitals and take care of the doctors and nurses and people with COVID.
Unbelievable. Paul?
Hey, Harvey. We, as Maggie said, we did a report for Mothers for Peace. It's on the website, taking a look at Diablo Canyon Unit 1. And back when they were making money, they were deferring maintenance. I mean, the maintenance backlog was absurd. They couldn't even afford to make the doors work on the control room. They had fans that sucked the radioactive gases out, and because it's on the ocean, the salt water had decayed away so much so that the fans were breaking. They had instruments in the basement. Remember, this plant was designed back with black and white tube TVs. They have tubes in there. They don't have transistors or integrated circuits. They have tube racks in the basement of that plant that they couldn't replace anymore because they were just too old. So now, in addition to all of that deferred maintenance when they had cash, they got two more problems. One is that under bankruptcy, their cash available is not going to be controlled by them, but by a judge. Maybe that's a good thing. And the second thing is, as you say, the power market, the cost of power, other than Diablo, the cost is dropping dramatically. So you're right. It makes absolutely no sense to keep this plant running, and it certainly makes no sense to keep it running with additional deferred maintenance like they're suggesting.
And in this case, in California, by the way, around the country we have the problem that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, blocks all these complaints from citizens. But in California now, essentially, the governor is going to decide, because the governor is running the bankruptcy, and he's the one, and he has to sign off on the bankruptcy, as do the victims in Northern California, whose lives were destroyed by PG&E's negligence, and they burning down the town of Paradise and so on. And either the bankruptcy is going to go through, and the governor will decide there what the fate of Diablo is, or if it doesn't go through, it's highly likely the state will take over the power plant, and then we'll see what happens there. So this is a situation where this is the governor, Gavin Newsom, is going to make this decision. And let's see what happens here. But this issue of the 1,000 or 1,500 people coming in to do this work, which is completely unnecessary, this has to resonate. Paul Gunter?
Right. Well, there's also the question of whether any of these plants should be allowed to run, given that what needs to happen now is there needs to be an evaluation of the safety of the operation of these nuclear power stations in a pandemic situation. When you look at the record of industry and NRC meetings on this, the last, the pandemic plan for nuclear power stations is dated. It's the last edition of their review was in 2009, and in 2007, Pacific Gas and Electric was part of a 7-utility review called the Microbiological Threat to Nuclear Power or to the National Power Grid, Advanced Pandemic Planning for Utility Executives, and they concluded that the prospect of a pandemic is not widely cast as a true strategic matter in the energy and utility sector. So they're, they have played down, and according to this report, they even when it was last reviewed, they played it down in that they were avoiding decisions that could cost money. And to do that, they relied on overconfidence and a hopeful reliance on a positive but nebulous outcome, like a vaccine or a treatment. But in fact, what we've got now is, again, has been repeated here, is that the workforce is going to get impacted. And they're going to experience a spike, just like the general population is. Only these are highly qualified, difficult to replace jobs like control room operators. You don't just take these people off the street, and they're limited. There are limited assets to the nuclear industry, and so they're going to try to conserve them. But they're also planning to, and I was on a call this morning with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the industry, a telephone conference call. The public got 15 minutes to ask questions from this hour-and-a-half call. But I can tell you that they're more concerned about giving the industry exemptions from requirements that were put in place to protect public health and safety from an overly fatigued workforce that's been decimated by disease. And that will result in bad decisions, just like, and if it's just sleepiness, like what happened at 3 Mile Island at 4 a.m. on March 28, 1979, that lack of attentiveness, that lack of fitness for duty was responsible for a human error that caused a mechanical failure to turn into a meltdown that could have otherwise have been managed if they had been alert and fit for duty. We're talking about most of the nuclear power stations now under that gun. And let me just, end this long-winded rail by saying that condition, even by NRC and the Federal Emergency Management Agency, is supposed to be going through a review right now. I mean, there is a memorandum of understanding between NRC and FEMA that says that that they need to do a radiological emergency preparedness review for the emergency plan for these plants that are now undergoing this kind of stress, deferred maintenance, get them in, get them out kind of approach, when in fact, by letter of their own understanding between FEMA and the NRC, it says a pandemic outbreak or other events occur or are anticipated that may impact the utility to effectively implement off-site emergency planning and procedures needs to be addressed in by directive to evaluate if the pandemic has affected the reliability of the emergency plan. Now, anybody in their right mind knows that you cannot evacuate a population that's under house arrest by viral threat. And that's the condition that's now sweeping across this country. And as I said, it looks like a 50-foot tsunami, only it's going to be a tired workforce. It's going to be an overwhelmed regulator. It's going to be deferred maintenance and repairs that could go on for who knows if this particular virus will cycle 3 times before we see it die back. That's almost 2 years. And
wow.
So this is we can't underestimate the fact that we are looking at something akin to a 50-foot tall tsunami.
Paul, will you send me, please, Paul, one sec, Maggie. Will you send me, please, and send to Maggie, too, I'm sure, that what you just read to me, what you just cited, because I'm going to need to have
Yeah, I'm going to credit that to David Lochbaum, who is formerly with the Union of Concerned Scientists, who has now pointed out to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and FEMA that it's that they have a choice. Either FEMA can go ahead and direct it now, that they need to do an emergency plan effectiveness review for every nuclear power station under the gun of the COVID threat, or the NRC can initiate it. But one or the other, and it may actually, it's just not part of the public record. I mean, maybe we're both just, saying that what the NRC is going to later admit, but I'll bet you dollars to donuts that it hasn't been done yet. And
if you'll send me all that stuff, I'd really appreciate it. I mean, it's devastating. We're looking here at, I don't have to tell you. Maggie, go ahead, please.
I was going to agree with Paul, but explain some other things to it. He talked about a couple things. He talked about the aging of the personnel. We work with a lot of interns that we've had come on and work with Fairewinds, and with all of their connections and all of the colleges that we've spoken at, hardly anyone is majoring in nuclear engineering anymore or training to be a control room operator. People want to go where they feel the futures are. And all the young people we've met, if they're going into any of those fields in the energy field, they want to go into whether it's environmental science or learn about solar or wind or other forms of generation, or go to work for a tech firm that's changing the structure of how the grid works, all of these different things. So that's one thing. The second that Paul talked about is the percentage of risk. How can they evaluate percentage of the risk actually at all? They have never gotten risk right. They haven't gotten it right on any nuclear meltdowns. I mean, there have been 5 atomic power meltdowns in under 40 years. And so does that meet their what was it? They didn't expect one meltdown every 2,000 years or some weird thing they had originally said. I mean, it's just all bogus.
Right.
Kick for a minute over to when our daughter was with EMS, and she was down here, Charleston County EMS in South Carolina, before she became a nurse and a trauma nurse. Charleston County EMS had radiation rigs on their ambulances. I mean, they had all the equipment to monitor radiation. Nobody knew how to use it. Nobody was instructed. There was no protective gear. There was nothing. So if you're going to run these plants with hardly any personnel, and which goes to all the things Paul said, and there is a lack of experienced workers, they are dying off. You look at all of that. then you look at the fact that the emergency plans don't work under any level, and then if they had to call emergency personnel in, what are you going to send them in, to just on a suicide mission to die? Because none of them know what to do. There's no training. There's no protection. It's not like in, for example, France has the trains, the high-speed trains. They're even using those for COVID now that can be used in the event of a disaster, a meltdown, and yet that still won't work and suffice. All of these plants, we should take a stand in this country that Germany took and shut them all down.
Well, it's amazing to think about operating these reactors in the middle of a COVID crisis. I want to ask you a question, Arnie. Real quick, though, how do people get a hold of you, Maggie and Arnie? We're almost out of time.
843-501-7660 is the main line, and the website is Fairewinds, FAIREWINDS.org. We're a nonprofit. There you go.
There you go. Very good. And Paul?
You can get hold of us through beyondnuclear.org.
Okay, so I want to ask this question, Arnie, of a nuclear engineer, Arnie Gundersen. Can you do social distancing in a reactor control room?
No, not really. You know, when you're in a control room, there's supposed to be 5 people in the control room. Probably you can do social distancing. But when you're repairing a component, there could easily be 5 people within 1 foot of the broken component. You know, technicians doing this, that, or the other thing. Some of them might be lifting something heavy, but it might be an electrical issue. And there's absolutely no way that you can do social distancing. I've been in the containment at Dresden during an outage, and oh my God, there were guys are bumping elbows no matter which way you turn. So no, you can't do social distancing when items are being repaired.
And I assume, having seen, the only time I've been so-called in a control room was when I watching the China Syndrome. But that's not a real big space. You're saying there's a minimum of 5 people in a control room?
Yeah, there's a NRC mandate of 5 reactor operators in the control room. Now, you know, if they both want to read, 2 or 3 people want to read a particular manual, they're going to break the social distancing regulations. But, you know, if you spread out over the whole room, you probably can say, well, that's social distancing. You know, they only have roughly 6 teams of operators. So if one operator gets sick on each team, they can easily fall below the NRC minimum number of reactor operators allowed to run the reactor.
And how about these teams of people that go around and do the repairs and the refueling? What happens when they start getting decimated? There's not a big bench here, I assume, for people who come out and do this work.
No, when they get decimated, one, the town that they're living in or shopping in for food or whatever is also going to be decimated. And 2, the work has to slow down. I mean, I've actually seen people so fatigued that they've fallen asleep and fallen into the reactor fuel pool from exhaustion. And now, of course, you're compounding it because you've got fewer people doing the same amount of, trying to do the same amount of work in the same amount of time. It just can't happen. And if we're concerned about nuclear safety, we should take our time in these outages. There's no rush. America is not going to go into a massive blackout if Limerick doesn't start up on time. There's no patriotic issue to force these plants to start up sooner than and not meet the commitments that they had previously made. So my theory is take your time, forget your bonus. You're not going to get your bonus this year, senior managers, and oh well, the rest of us might live to see another day because you won't get your bonus.
Boy, if I've ever done a more terrifying hour, I can't remember it. I mean, this is just unreal. We still have 96 of these reactors operating around the country. We've got these itinerant bands of nuclear workers. How many different crews are there to refuel these reactors? How many could there be?
Well, there's less and less because a lot of them are aging out and they're sick. They've had exposures. The industry's name for them, and you can leave this for your listeners, they're people who go in and to work on the reactor because it's hot. They get a dose every time, and they have to be carefully monitored. And what we found is a lot of them are not carefully monitored. And on top of that, the industry calls them by the delightful name. And both Arnie and I came from the industry. And when I found it out, I was so upset and so offended. That's part of when I got out. The industry calls them jumpers and sponges because they jump in and out and they can take as much as they can. That's their dose. And then they go back somewhere in their home turf and live out the rest of the year.
Of course, in Russia, they were called liquidators at Chernobyl. Well, this has been absolutely terrifying. Couldn't have had it from better people. Thank you, Paul Gunter. Thank you, Maggie and Arnie Gundersen. Hopefully, we'll be back next week at the Green Power and Wellness Show.
Thank you, Harvey.
Everybody. And thank you, and no nukes.
Don't you know we're gonna have a Solartopia all over God's green world?
Will we bid that